Hello, dear viewers. I mostly do kill counts, but I thought I should talk about this book because I love it. In fact, I love it so much that the first and third time I read it in a whole day. And that book in question is Most Ardently, a Pride and Prejudice remix. You've probably heard of this book from the controversy it stirred up in 2024, but we'll get to that later. This is going to be a summary of the book and also a review. It is mostly a summary because I have a lot to say about this book. The book is very funny. We'll get to that in a minute. If you just want the review, here is a timestamp for that on screen right now. Alright, let's get to the summary. Our main character is Oliver Bennet. Hold up, I hear people who read the original book say, what about Elizabeth? Well, he is Elizabeth. He's transgender. That's the main change, but it makes the book really interesting as a result. You get to see firsthand knowing that he's trans and how he's struggling with that. The dysphoria and dysmorphia is like the only trigger warnings in this book, besides, the dead naming, both intentionally and unintentionally, so if you don't want to hear about any of that stuff, just click off the video, or don't read the book. The only people who know that Oliver is trans is his best friend Charlotte, her lover Lou, and his oldest sister Jane. Plus his aunt and uncle, but they're only in like one scene. Speaking of characters, let's get introduced to them. First up are the Bennets. We got Oliver / Elizabeth. He pretends to be a woman during the day, but some nights he goes out as himself. Jane is the oldest, and she's the only Bennet to know that Oliver is trans. She's also the one to end up with Bingley, just like in the original story, but... I should have said spoiler warning. Why did I forget that? Next is Lydia, Mary, and Kitty. They're not important. They're just kind of set dressing. But in the original novel, Lydia was the one to end up with the grifter, so there's that. Next up are the parents. They're the one Oliver is super nervous about coming out to, especially Mrs. Bennet. She, wants him to get married to a very respectable man, and she has some very cringy views on marriage that make all the other characters uncomfortable. Next up, we have Fitzwilliam Darcy. He's an asshole at the start of the story, but he becomes a good character by the end, I swear. Also, just like in the original novel, he is the love interest. Next up, we have Charles, Bingley, and Caroline and Louisa. Charles is Darcy's best friend and the one courting Jane. I love him. He is the sweetest character in this entire book. He has two sisters, Caroline and Louisa. They're bitchy, and Caroline's the only interesting one because she has a crush on Darcy. Next is George Wickham. He's the aforementioned grifter and plays a major role in the story. The last suitor is Mr. Collins. He inherited the Bennet property because it wasn't entailed to a male relative. Mr. Collins is the perfect segue to talk about, the girl's inheritance situation. Okay, so what that means is that their, property Longbourn can only be inherited by a man, and because Mr. Bennet only has, daughters, it's going to be inherited by a distant male relative. Also, they won't have enough money to financially support themselves after he dies because they are cash poor. I think their inheritance, by English law, their inheritance will be split up among the father's fortune, and I think they're only getting £500, 1813, which is basically pennies and nowhere near enough to support them for the rest of their lives. After that earthy introduction, let's get into the story. We open with the titular line, or a version of it. The original Pride and Prejudice opens with the line, "It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife." Of course, this changes in Most Ardently. Its introduction is, "It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single boy in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a future wife," unless that boy was Oliver Bennet. Of course. Anyway, just like in the original novel, the book opens with the mention of a certain Charles Bingley arriving at Netherfield. He has a fortune of about £4,000 or £5,000 a year, and adjusting for inflation in US dollars, that's about $490,000 to $613,000 a year, so he is a rich bitch, to say the least. Mrs. Bennet, being Mrs. Bennet, is immediately like, "Oh my word, I must have one of my daughters married to Charles Bingley." And, her calling him a girl makes him cringe. There's a lot of moments like that in the book, obviously. So that night they attend the Meryton ball, and guess which two rich bitches pull up? That's right, it's Charles Bingley and his best friend, Fitzwilliam Darcy. When they get to the Meryton ball, Jane is being a good sister and staying with Oliver to make sure he feels comfortable, but he notices that she is slowly getting closer to Bingley. Now, it would be scandalous for a woman to approach a man during a dance, so she has to make her way there without, making a scene or directly beelining for him. So they are talking to this colossal bore of a man, Mr. Harrison, before Bingley walks up to Jane and asks for a dance. Ooh. Jane says yes, and they're off, meeting for the first time. When she's done with her dance, she decides to get Oliver a dance because, he needs some fun and he hasn't danced with anyone yet. She decides to try and go over to Bingley and Darcy and get Oliver a dance with Darcy. And Oliver's like, please, I beg you, please don't make me do this. Because him and Darcy interacted earlier, and Darcy fucking glared at him. Darcy, my man, you are not beating the woman hater allegations. When they get there, Bingley and Darcy are talking about how the latter hasn't danced with anyone yet, and Bingley basically says, surely someone has caught your eye, and Darcy comments on the beauty of Jane. Bingley has noticed them and offers to introduce him and Oliver, but without even looking at Oliver, he says, she's tolerable, but not handsome enough to interest me. Do you realize how rude that is? Okay. Darcy calls Oliver ugly to his face, and Bingley is still treating this man with respect. Dude, if that was my friend, there would be no telling how hard and fast I would smack them upside the head. A few weeks later, the Bartholomew Fair is in town, and Oliver decides to sneak out of a shared room with Jane. He goes to Charlotte's house and changes into his male clothing before going out to the Bartholomew Fair. He and his family go every single year, and he knows the whole shebang from front to back at this point. He wanders through a few pop-up stages before going to one with a sword-swallowing man. That's what she said, but I digress. Anyway, during the performance, he hears someone speaking, and he thinks the other man is talking to him. That man is, of course, Charles Bingley. When Oliver responds, Bingley's like, oh, you've been to the fair before? Me and my bro have always wanted to go, but we haven't found the time. If you would be willing to, can you guide me and him around the fair? And Bingley's referring to Darcy, of course. Eventually, Darcy returns and Oliver accepts to be their guide. He introduces himself as Oliver Blake, and he insists that they call him Oliver. This is something that Darcy's a little bit suspicious of, but he doesn't make too much of a fuss about. So the dream team spends the whole night together, going to a bookstore, chatting about animals in the shows, and Darcy and Oliver being ridiculously gay. Oliver manages to make Darcy smile while they're hanging out even. This is a huge juxtaposition from when it was Elizabeth to Oliver. Darcy is acting like, a good person. It's almost like he's a completely different man in the company of other men. I wonder why. Anyway, after a fun evening together, Darcy invites Oliver to go to Waitier's next Tuesday. Waitier's, I don't know how to pronounce it, I looked it up. I'm just gonna go with Waitier's. Scream at me in the comments all you want, I don't care. Now Waitier's is a place where men and boys can gamble and engage in debauchery away from the prying eyes of their stupid wives. It's a gentleman's club, essentially. Now Oliver's kind of shocked, so I'm going to read you this entire segment. It's on the back of the book. Because there is so much romantical tension, you could cut it with a knife. Oliver's head was spinning. Darcy and Bingley wanted to spend more time with him? At Whittier's of all places? He thought going there felt terrifyingly illicit, but why should it be? He was a boy. The rest of the world may not see it most of the time, but Darcy and Bingley did, and they were the ones offering the invitation. Are you sure? Oliver asked. I didn't think entrance was allowed without a membership. We are permitted to bring a guest, Darcy said. We could bring a guest every week if we wanted to. I'd be happy to make you mine. Oliver arched an eyebrow. Darcy's face flushed pink. My guest, that is. I can't even make a comment about this. What do you want me to say? After spending the whole night with the two, Oliver goes home and has some pretty conflicting feelings about Darcy. I mean, he's a totally different guy, and he says as much to Jane. Jane also gets an invitation to have some tea at Netherfield over the weekend. I know we're jumping around, but I'm sorry. Oliver decides to visit Charlotte and Lou, and while he's there, Charlotte says he should get married and settle down. It's kind of an important thing in the book, and I'll just talk about all this historical context to get it out of the way. I'm sorry I didn't talk about it while I was explaining it. I forgot about it, and now I have to talk about it now. In the Regency period, the idea of the love match was becoming increasingly popular. The original Pride and Prejudice was actually something that spearheaded the idea, because, of course every straight girl wants a man like Mr. Darcy. Sadly, many women in this time period couldn't marry for love. As previously stated, when a father died in England during this time, his money would be split evenly amongst the children, except for the oldest. I think he would get the lion's share, or the guy who inherited the property. Anyway, even if you were rich, that wouldn't be enough money to support you for the rest of your life. So many of these women would have to marry for money instead of love. That's what Charlotte chooses to marry for, but we'll get into that later. That is also why Mrs. Bennet is very eager to marry her daughters off. Anyway, Oliver he basically says, I'm not a woman, and even if I was, I wouldn't resign myself to being someone's wife just for financial support. This conversation will come up later. More importantly, while he's there, the 42nd Regiment comes to town, and more specifically, a certain George Wickham gets introduced. It's kind of brief, but again, we'll talk about it later when it becomes important. During this interaction, Wickham says to stay away from Darcy. Ooh, mysterious. He also says that he won't gossip, but he believes that Mr. Darcy hates women, which isn't a surprise. We also get introduced to Avery's Tavern, a Molly House. Molly houses were basically gay bars and hangout places. Some were more like brothels, but others were more like coffee houses like the one in Avery's Tavern. Unlike in real life, where there are fleeting records of poor women going to Molly houses, Lou and Charlotte have gone to Avery's Tavern themselves and actively recommends that Oliver should go there. So, the time has arrived and to go to Wadier's, and Oliver finds Bingley and Darcy waiting there for him. Darcy leads Oliver to the table and they start talking. Darcy says that he didn't really like Wadier's when he first went, but it has grown on him. Soon the food comes out, and Darcy does say that the food is one of the reasons why it grew on him. Because, the food, unlike other gentlemen's clubs at the time, is top-notch. After dinner, the men start playing card games. Because Oliver has lived most of his life as a woman, he doesn't know how to play any. And that suits Darcy just fine because he hates card games. The two decide to leave Bingley to have his own fun, and they take a walk in the park, and it somehow gets even more gay. Oliver gets home, and he has a little adventure in store. When he left his house, he was wearing his men's clothes, so now he has to A, climb back into his room, B, change while no one notices, and there are two little details that will hinder his progress. So we got C, his dad is awake and in his office, and B, the trellis that Oliver has to climb to get back into his room goes right next to the office window. So, little bro's basically cooked. Oliver falls, and his dad tells him to go through the window. And, Oliver climbs through and has no choice but to come after his dad. But right before he comes out, Mr. Bennet says, I must say, you look very handsome. And when Oliver comes out, his dad accepts him and calls him his son. It is way too sweet for me to comment on. I really like that the author wrote that Mr. Bennet is accepting. The author himself is trans, and I like that, we get accepting parents in a time where this wouldn't really be accepted. Finally, the weekend has arrived, and Jane is going to have tea with Bingley and his sisters. It's raining that day, so Jane asks to use the coach, and Mrs. Bennet is like, oh, I just remembered Mr. Bennet is using the coach today. Sorry, looks like you'll have to use the horse. And her plan is to get Jane sick, so she will have to stay with Mr. Bingley. The next day, lo and behold, Oliver gets a letter from his sister that says that she is sick. Oliver is pretty pissed, so he decides to go too. However, Mr. Bennet is conveniently using the horse that day as well, so he has to walk in the mud and rain. When he gets to the house, and as he's changing, he can hear Caroline, Louisa, and Darcy in another room. The sisters are talking about how they can't believe that Oliver started walking in the rain and how uncivilized he is. So in the middle of this conversation, Darcy slams his book shut and leaves the room, ending the conversation. Congratulations, Mr. Darcy. You have done the bare minimum for human decency. Not even 24 hours after Oliver arrives, his mom and his two sisters pull up. This is the scene where we get to see her cringy views on marriage, because she is, yapping to Bingley. So they're taking a tour around the property, and she's saying some crazy shit about how Bingley and Jane will make such handsome grandchildren all to Bingley. Keep in mind that they're not even engaged yet, they're just courting. And Bingley is listening, and he doesn't say anything about it. Okay, pause the story for a second. This part about Bingley is arguably the most unrealistic part of the story. How did his parents, or his governess presumably, raised this sweetheart of a man, and like these two Karens of his sisters, who in this scene are like giggling and gossiping about Mrs. Bennet. How? Eventually, Mrs. Bennet and the girls leave, and the main people are hanging out in the drawing room. Caroline is being super annoying and attention-seeking, and in this scene, she picks up the book that is the sequel to the one Mr. Darcy's reading. So, she's like flipping the pages with, a little bit too much aggression, and she's sighing a lot. She's obviously trying to get the attention of Mr. Darcy, but Mr. Darcy could give less of a shit about her. She says this: "I must say there is nothing like reading. Truly, every other form of entertainment pales in comparison. One day when I am married and manage a beautiful home, I shall be utterly dejected if I haven't an extensive library of my own." And to that, Oliver responds in his mind. Oliver began to wonder if Caroline had ever read a book at all. This was the line that made me crack up. Like, I was reading this at school, and I started laughing. I don't know why this, hit me so hard. I don't know why the comedy just really hit for me. Anyway, Caroline keeps being annoying, and she grabs Oliver by the arm, and they start, walking around the room, just to get the attention of Mr. Darcy, mind you. Caroline proposes the idea that the two find Darcy's worst qualities. However, Caroline points out something that can barely be called a flaw. The conversation goes like this: "Darcy thinks himself more intelligent than everyone around him. He is very intelligent, so as a result, he comes off intimidating." Oliver resisted the urge to side-eye Caroline. They were supposed to be poking fun at Darcy's character, but it seemed more like Caroline's attempt to continue flirting with him. Darcy said. "I suppose I can accept that." Oliver rolled his eyes. "Of course you can. That was hardly a character flaw at all." "I'm not sure I agree, though. I would say my worst characteristic is that my good opinion, once lost, is lost forever." Darcy crossed his arms over his chest and smiled wryly. "And what is your conclusion about my character?" "I think your inclination to abhor everybody would be your most accurate flaw." Oliver responded. "And yours is your inclination to misunderstand everyone." So this scene plays out roughly the same way in Pride and Prejudice, with the dialogue being almost identical to the one in its Jane Austen counterpart. After this conversation, Oliver goes in search of Jane and finds her talking to Mr. Bingley. To her surprise, the couple is already at the flirting stage. Oliver is pretty inclined to stay. Not really, he thinks he's overstaying their welcome, but the next day, Mr. Darcy not so subtly implies that he thinks the two have been staying for way too long. So, Oliver and Jane decide to leave that day, much to the sadness of Bingley. Almost as soon as they get home, they receive an invitation to the Netherfield ball. While they were there, Lydia suggested that they should host a ball, so there's that coming back. Mr. Bennet also mentions that his heir, Mr. Collins, will be arriving in a matter of days. However, once they get to the Netherfield ball, Mr. Collins is already there. Mr. Collins is a creep right off the bat, so that's just a wonderful start. Almost as soon as they meet, he insists on a dance with Oliver. Now, because Oliver promised to his mother that he would dance with someone, he accepts the dance, because what choice does he have? Just like in the original novel, Mr. Collins has the most uneventful and weird things to say. Almost as soon as they start dancing, he says that Oliver has, quote, "such beautiful childbearing hips." Okay, that's fine. Of course, Oliver feels very conflicted about this, and he finally gets a break when they start line dancing. Oliver has to go to the girls' side, and he doesn't want to do that naturally, but no matter. Let the dancing commence. He is happy to stay a farther distance away from Mr. Collins, and is even more relieved when he gets to switch out his dance partner. To his luck, it's Mr. Darcy. They talk about the nature of Mr. Collins, and Oliver marvels at the outfit Darcy is wearing. Oliver has no men's formal wear, considering all formal events he attends are with his family, so he really loves Mr. Darcy's drip. He's wearing a green coat and some other fancy clothes that I cannot remember off the top of my head that Oliver wants. During the dance, both Oliver and Mr. Collins get so messed up and zoned out that the latter steps on Oliver's foot, who is again relieved to get away from this fucking creep. When he sits down, Mr. Wickham immediately comes over to try and riz him up. I am sorry for that verbiage and I will not use it again. Wickham does some flirting of his own before being turned away. He's kind of bitter about it, but Oliver could give less of a shit about it, considering he just got away from creepy-ass Mr. Collins. The next day, Oliver goes out in some men's clothing. He takes a seat in an acrobatic show, and Mr. Wickham sits down next to him. He says that he recognizes Oliver, who panics, but it turns out that Mr. Wickham was at Waitier's the exact same day he was. So no need to worry. The main takeaway from the conversation is what Wickham says about Darcy. Basically, Darcy and Wickham's cousin, Genevieve, were engaged, and he barely speaks to her and apparently hates her. Instead of breaking it off, he keeps the engagement with Genevieve just to keep her isolated. Wickham also mentions that Darcy is a frequent visitor of Molly House. Oliver clocks Mr. Wickham's shit like, don't spread rumors if they're not true, dickwad, before leaving. The Molly House stuff will come up later. You know, I have a fun game for the viewers at home. Take a shot every time I say this will come up later. Oliver changes out at Charlotte's house, and to his luck, he sees 2 carriages outside. That's right, Mr. Collins is showing up way earlier than expected. 3 days later, after awkwardly interacting with him, Mr. Collins wishes to speak to Oliver in private during dinner. Everyone leaves, including Jane, despite Oliver being like, please don't leave me here with this man, I hate him. But there's nothing Jane can do. As you can expect, Mr. Collins asks Oliver to marry him. Oliver starts having these thoughts about what married life would be like. Having to be a woman, that name Elizabeth being said over and over again, a name that he already grew out of. Bearing Mr. Collins' children, his body morphing and changing in terrible ways. He can never resign himself to such a life. Like, immediately after Collins leaves the room, Mrs. Bennet is like, you will marry this man. You will go back into that room and you will accept his proposal. And Oliver's like, no, I can do what I want, Mom. And, the 2 are fighting, and Mr. Bennet comes into the room, and Mrs. Bennet is like, if you do not marry this man right now, I will not speak to you ever again. And Mr. Bennet says, well, checkmate, wife. If you do marry Mr. Collins, I won't speak to Oliver ever again. So, it's over. So, her decision is effectively overruled. When Oliver talks to Charlotte and Lou the next day, Charlotte says that if Mr. Collins proposed, she would accept. I mean, despite Oliver's, despite Oliver's gripes with the man, let's face it. Despite he is boring and very full of himself, sure, but he's not outright mean. He wouldn't hurt his wife or kids. Not to mention that Mr. Collins has the money to support himself, his wife, and their future kids, so it wouldn't be a bad idea. This will come back later. Keep this in the back of your mind. One night, after Mr. Collins has left, Oliver decides to go to Avery's Tavern. He gets a code from the bartender and is let in by the guy manning the door. There are a few people inside, including, you guessed it, Mr. Darcy. He is sitting in a chair reading a book. Darcy goes there to read the collection of gay literature they have and recommends him to Oliver. Right as they're talking, someone sits down at the piano and starts to play a waltz. The 2 go onto the dance floor and begin to dance. Towards the end of it, Mr. Darcy says that he wants to kiss Oliver, and that's what they do. When they pull away, Darcy gets this, he goes from being, very, loving to, stoic in a second, and he runs off. The next morning, Oliver decides to do something drastic. He walks downstairs wearing trousers. Mrs. Bennet is kind of freaking out, but Mr. Bennet thinks his son looks very fetching. Eventually, Mrs. Bennet gives in, but that doesn't stop her from casting glares at her son every chance she gets. However, Oliver ignores it. What is harder to ignore is the fact that Bingley and Darcy are suddenly gone. Without notice, Jane receives a letter saying that the 2 have left Netherfield, and that breaks her. They were all but engaged at this point, so what happened? It will be brought up later. Put a pin in it. We will be coming back to all of this, I swear. Soon after this, he goes to Charlotte's house, and she sits him down. She tells Oliver that she is getting married to Mr. Collins. Anyway, the 2 start arguing over this, and Oliver eventually leaves. This makes him pretty sad, and he's nervous to speak with her. Later, Mrs. Bennet tells Oliver that Mr. Wickham is coming over to see him in private. Oliver is pretty apprehensive about this, but Wickham arrives at 11 o'clock sharp. He tells Oliver that he wants to marry him, but he turns him down just like with Mr. Collins. However, Mr. Wickham is that one guy that hasn't learned the definition of the word no. Just like with Mr. Collins, Mrs. Bennet demands that Oliver accept Wickham's proposal at once. Of course he says no, but she doesn't make too much of a fuss about it right now. A few days pass and Oliver decides to visit Lou. She tells Oliver that Charlotte wants to see him, and she isn't mad at all. For context, her and Mr. Collins are already married, and so she lives at his property, Hunsford. So they all meet back up at Hunsford, and the two apologize and make up. During this visit, we meet Lady Catherine de Bourgh, who just so happens to be Darcy's aunt. I think in the original novel, Lady Catherine de Bourgh is his cousin, but no matter. When they meet, she again treats him like a little girl, which is not very fun. What is more not fun is that 2 days later, Darcy pulls up and asks to speak to Oliver. Can you guess what Mr. Darcy does? That's right, propose. He also mentions the thing with Genevieve, but that isn't really important. Also, apparently her name is Liliana? I'm so confused. That's not really important, but what is important is that he broke up Jane and Bingley because he didn't think she reciprocated his feelings enough. Oliver rightfully flips out on Darcy, pointing out that she's shy and she was devastated when they took off. Also, the fact that he was meddling in the romantic life of his friend, and that's not good. Eventually, Mr. Darcy leaves with his tail tucked between his legs, as he should. Another dick move on Darcy's part. When Oliver gets back from Hunsford, his mom's like, look at Charlotte, look at her new social capital. That could have been you, Elizabeth. And Oliver does not care. The same day, he gets a letter from Darcy clearing up the whole thing with Genevieve and mentioning a new fact. Mr. Wickham tried to get married to Darcy's sister, Georgiana, for her $30,000 fortune. No sooner than he reads the note, Mr. Wickham arrives to try and propose again. Again, Oliver says no. Mr. Wickham starts bitching and moaning, sounding like Alpha Dom before leaving. Mrs. Bennet is furious this time, yelling at him, not just for turning down his proposal, but because he saw Oliver at trousers, and she will not be allowing that in her house. Elizabeth is a woman, and she will dress like one. As soon as she says that, Oliver bursts into tears. He screams, Maybe I don't want to be anyone's wife. Mr. Bennet hears the commotion and dismisses Mrs. Bennet and comforts Oliver. After this, Oliver decides to go to his aunt and uncle's house for a little while. Jane has also been staying there for a month or so. I forgot to mention that. We also got a little bit more confirmation that their relationship is kind of broken off because she encountered him in the wild, and Bingley was like, no. During this visit, his aunt and uncle decide to go to Pembrey, Darcy's property. Of course, Oliver does not want to go there, but his aunt and uncle assure them that Darcy's not in town. And Oliver has to admit that the house is pretty, and that Darcy has some pretty sprawling grounds. To his luck, Darcy is there and asks to walk with Oliver. They go to a bridge, and Oliver feels that the time is right, and he comes out to Darcy. It's a pretty well-written scene, and there is a ridiculously funny part about this scene. And I shall read it to you. You've met me. I've had to pretend to be a girl. Darcy blinked, his eyebrows raising. I have? Several times, actually. He kept up his neck. The name my parents gave me when I was born. It was Elizabeth. Darcy's brow furrowed. Elizabeth? Oliver grimaced. Elizabeth Bennet. Darcy's mouth dropped open and he took a step back. Bennet? He stared at Oliver wide-eyed as Oliver's pulse pounded in his ears. This was their moment. The moment that Darcy either accepted him or Darcy laughed. Hard. So, after they leave the bridge, Oliver receives a letter from Wickham. Wickham has discovered that Oliver is trans and is going to blackmail him. The deal is that Oliver will marry Wickham and the secret is revealed, or he refuses again and Wickham will tell his whole family and the world that he is trans. To figure this whole thing out, to see if, either Wickham's gonna blackmail him or not, they decide to meet up at the statue of Alfred the Great. Wickham, being the whiny little bitch that he is, once again proposes to Oliver. And once again, Oliver turns him down. In fact, he says he would sooner marry a lamppost than marry Wickham at all. So, it's basically set in stone that Wickham is going to tell Oliver's family. After this whole thing goes down, he goes to Westminster Bridge to take his mind off all the shit that just happened. Darcy meets him there, and they watch as Bingley proposes to Jane. Darcy fixed his fuck up, and now our favorite straight couple is back together. It is also on this bridge that the titular line is stated by Mr. Darcy. I love you, Oliver Bennet, most ardently. This scene, like specifically the one in Pride and Prejudice, has been living rent-free since the since 1813, when Jane Austen published Pride and Prejudice. And under the cover of rain, Darcy and Oliver kiss once more. The couple plus Jane returns to Longbourn, and lo and behold, Wickham and Mr. Collins are already there. Mr. Collins gave Wickham the information that Oliver was trans, by the way. When he gets there, Oliver reintroduces himself as a man to his mother, and she's surprisingly very supportive. Congratulations, Mrs. Bennet, you did one thing right. Oliver also says that he and Darcy have been courting and that Wickham and Collins are here to expose the truth. After learning this, Mr. and Mrs. Bennet unleash hell on those two. They're like, you're gonna get the fuck out of our house and our lives, and if you tell anyone that Oliver's trans, all that social capital you have is going down the drain. And Mr. Collins, by the way, you're not getting that inheritance because the doctor that assisted in the birth of Oliver will testify that he was born a man. We're playing 4D chess here! And if you're wondering how that second part works, birth certificates were not required in England until July 1st, 1837, and this book takes place in the Regency period 20 years before the fact. Anyway, the two, Wickham and Collins fuck off, and there's an epilogue. Oliver goes to Avery's tavern and he reads with Darcy, and they say that they're both pretty distracted from the men sitting across from each other. Ooh! Of course they're referring to each other. I don't know why I wrote that in such a weird way. And they kiss. The end. Time for the review. I love this book, if you couldn't tell. It's a 10 out of 10 for me. It's amazing. There's one minor problem, but we'll get into that later. But first, let's talk about the things that I did like. I think the trans reading really lends itself well to Pride and Prejudice, especially with that she's not handsome enough line. It's also an interesting perspective since I myself am not trans, and it allows me to peek into the mind of someone who is trans, and I was really able to understand what they were going through. I also like the humor in this book. I think that some of it was intentional, but some of it is also unintentional, and I really like that. Also, the idea of this regal man busting his ass laughing is just hilarious to me. It's also a really good look at Regency life too, specifically for women. I know there's a ton of historical inaccuracies, but shut up! I like that all the historical context, it's very digestible, it talks about the social and economic pressures of women during the Regency period, and you can understand Charlotte's decision in the end, even if you don't agree with it. The last point that I want to talk about, is the romance. I feel it. I think that in a realistic scenario, Bingley and Jane and Darcy and Oliver would work very well together. I also really like the main antagonist. I know I'm mentioning one last thing. Again, shut up. I really liked Wickham as the main protagonist or antagonist. I like that Wickham's really over the top, but it's fair because he's the grifter guy, and he's also it's also he's very over the top, but he does feel weirdly realistic. He's that one guy that will pester you over and over again, give me your phone number, give me your phone number, give me your phone number. That is sadly a very realistic character. Time for the things that I didn't like. There's one minor complaint, and it's the aspirations thing. I didn't bring it up in the summary due to the fact that it is already brought up once and immediately moved on from, aside from a few thoughts in Oliver's head. Basically, after going out one night as himself, he takes out a sheet of paper and writes down some aspirations, one of which include kissing a boy as a boy. Now, obviously, he fulfills it, but I wish that the whole aspirations thing was a bit more expanded on, referring back to it more, or just, writing on it more, because it's a one-off thing. I understand why they didn't, considering this book is jam-packed with stuff going on and characters. I also think that it would be better if they just cut it out completely. And that's for the things I didn't like. Let's move on to the controversy and why people don't like this book. I do not know what these people were thinking when they started reading this book, but Redditors in the r/ what was it, Jane Austen subreddit, please don't come for me. I think that's all I wanted to talk about. Thanks for watching. I think I'm gonna read Teach the Torches to Burn, a Romeo and Juliet remix next, so stay tuned for that. If you want me to do more stuff like this, comment down below, and have a great day.